You are listening to the Bureau Chiefs with Michael Serapio, a prime-time politics podcast from CPAC. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, there was a discernible change in tone on Parliament Hill this week as cooperation became the order of the day, with Conservatives declaring the party would support the government in areas it could in order to get things done for Canadians. Now, to that, the Conservative leader did meet with the Prime Minister to discuss how the two parties could move things forward. And going into that meeting, we'll take a listen to what we heard from Pierre Poilievre.
On the one hand, there's working to fast-track results for affordability, safety, and security, and asking tough questions to hold the government to account. The latter is not going to stop. We're going to keep holding the government accountable for high grocery costs, out-of-control crime, broken immigration, and our weak economy, which economists say is on life support. That at the same time, we can walk and chew gum, and that means we're going to work today. I'm going to say to the Prime Minister, let's work together to fast-track results for an affordable, safe, self-reliant economy.
And after the meeting, this is the statement we got from the Prime Minister, quote, met with Pierre Poilievre today. Canada's new government is moving fast, and we need Parliament to move swiftly to deliver for Canadians. We've put forward bills to strengthen bail and sentencing laws, build up a stronger economy, cut costs for the middle class, and protect Canadian workers. This is an important time to be working together, says the statement, and to pass the legislation Canadians are counting on. So what does this mean for the government's agenda? What does this mean for Canadians going forward? To talk about this, we're now joined by Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse, and joining us this week, Mia Rabson, Deputy Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Canadian Press. Nice to see you all.
Good to see you, Michael.
Okay, so to preface, with all this cooperation, there's still no rainbows over Parliament Hill. This is not sunshine and lollipops, but there is this stated cooperation now that the opposition and I guess presumably the government are working under. What will this change in tone accomplish, Tonda?
Well, we'll see. I mean, is it just ticking boxes? Are both leaders ticking a box saying, we offer to cooperate, we met with them, let's see what happens. What is interesting is that the Conservatives have agreed to move forward on a number of initiatives that have been stalled, bail reform being one. They want to move to pass the government's proposed GST credit for lower income families. Well, actually 22 million Canadians will benefit from it. So some things we'll see move along. And I take Mr. Poilievre at his word. I don't expect necessarily you'll see friendship breaking out all over the place and, cross-partisan, jokes and fun. It's going to be still a tough session because the Conservatives are very concerned that the Liberals may take, they're doing really well right now in the polls, right, post-Davos. And the Conservatives are very concerned that the Liberals might be looking at a spring election. So I'm not counting on, like you said, rainbows everywhere for the next several months.
Okay, Joël-Denis?
Last session, we spent, the government only managed to pass one or two bills, I think, if my memory is correct. That is very little accomplishment to show for. And I think this probably will help adopt more quickly some of the measures that the government has put forward. So we'll see whether this change of tone lasts. The proof will be in the pudding. But so far, I think the pudding looks appetizing for the Conservative because they do not want spring elections. And so I think they will be quite conciliatory, and that will change the dynamics. I don't expect Mr. Poilievre to be a different opposition leader. That's his job, to oppose, to criticize when the government is not doing its job. That's part of our democracy. And I don't think Canadians would agree for him to be very friendly with the Prime Minister, but he's got a job to do. At the same time, the Prime Minister has put some proposals on the table, and if they are going to be adopted at a time when there are many threats coming from outside, I think it's a good thing for Canadians.
Mia, what do you think will change with this spirit of cooperation?
I mean, to Tonda's point, we've already seen some of that happening. I mean, on the GST bill this week, I mean, it wasn't the Liberals who pushed for this to go faster. It was actually the Conservatives that put forward a motion to fast-track the GST bill through. Everybody supported that. We saw some cooperation even before the Conservative Convention on bail reform. There was a lot of fighting throughout the fall about that bail bill and how they were going to debate it, and now the committee seems to have sorted that out. So we have seen some positive signs, but these are kind of low-hanging fruit at this point. The big one coming up is the budget implementation bill. It is a confidence vote. The Carney government right now does not have the votes to pass it. It probably may not bring it to a vote unless it knows that it can pass it, unless it wants to trigger that spring election, which the Conservatives don't want, the NDP don't want, the Bloc Québécois don't want, the Liberals maybe want. So that's, to me, that's the big one. We already did see also some signs from the Conservatives that they won't just support everything. When Mark Carney introduced his new EV standards yesterday, his new EV policies, the Conservative criticism on it was quite sharp and actually not reflective of what industry or environment groups were saying. So they're not going to just support everything for sure, but we've seen some signs. There's still a lot bigger ones to come.
If I may say quickly,
Yeah,
I think the government has every interest to make sure that the Conservative Party collaborate with the government to try to stem the separatist movement in Alberta. Because if the government is being too harsh on the Conservative Party or rejects out of hand some proposals from the Conservative Party, it could, alienate more Albertans. So that's a tricky line on which the government has to work on.
Mm-hmm. Well, although to pick up on what Mia was saying, the budget implementation bill seems to be the litmus test. How far will they actually go to work with the government to get this passed or not get this passed? Which goes to a point that everybody was hinting at. So let me get there sooner than later. The continuing speculation that there might be a spring election. And part of that is the fact that we continue to see poll after poll, most recently Main Street, with showing the Liberals in the lead, Prime Minister Carney's popularity going up, not down, so his honeymoon continues and then some. What are you hearing about that possibility right now?
Well, no one's going to announce, yeah, we want a spring election.
Why not?
But what you do hear is all the machinations around how would they best avoid one? Will there still be floor crossers brought over by the Liberals from the Conservative side or from another party, potentially the NDP, to give Mr. Carney the majority that he would need to govern for the next 3 years now, I guess, because he's been in power now almost a year. So the idea of a spring election, look, it's a perennial parlor game in Ottawa, okay? The election speculation in a minority government comes with the territory. But I don't see that this Prime Minister particularly wants a campaign right now. He's got a whole slate of international travel that he wants to do this year to advance his economic agenda, getting more trade partners, new deals, bringing investment to Canada. And he also wants to move along all the other projects that he's got in mind. And whether or not he can bring the opposition along with him is a big question. To Mia's point about the auto strategy and the going all in on electric vehicles right now, like that's a big play that a lot of environmentalists are concerned about, a big portion of the Liberal base. So I don't see, while I understand the speculation and why it might be appealing to them to go with the polls looking like they are, and in the hopes of getting a majority rather, I also see many reasons why that might not happen.
Joël-Denis, what are you hearing?
The Prime Minister will have the final say as to whether Canadians go to the poll this spring. And in my sense, as Tonda is saying, I don't think he wants to go to the polls now. I don't think he likes campaigning or debating or answering questions from media on a daily basis. He would rather govern.
Stick needles in his eyes.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Maybe not as dramatic as that, but to some form, yes. So I would say that Liberal strategists will have to write a lot of convincing memos to convince Mr. Carney to pull the plug on this parliament, because he's got a lot of stuff on his agenda. He wants to govern. He wants to, build fast and at a speed we've never seen before. Govern probably at the speed we've never seen before. He's got a lot of the time to do it now. So that now is the time. And there's a CUSMA negotiation that is so important. And he's got a lot of stuff he needs to put the pieces together before he can say, I'm delivering the goods. So I think his preference is to govern, not campaign.
Mia?
Yeah, I concur. I mean, this is not a prime minister who's naturally a politician. Campaigns are not his comfort zone. He wants to govern. He has policies he wants to enact. There are things he wants to get done. To him, a campaign kind of just slows that down. The main way that we end up in an election is if this cooperation that we're talking about doesn't happen, because Mr. Carney, if he thinks he can't get cooperation to get his agenda through the House quickly now, he sees an election. Right now, all of the numbers would suggest the Liberals would win a majority. Well, that's how he's going to get it. So, the acid test really is this cooperation, and we know the opposition parties don't really want an election. So, how they figure out their own machinations to prevent that from happening without feeling like they're constantly propping up a government is sort of what they have to answer for.
Yeah, well, let me pick up with the opposition because, Joël-Denis, you and I were in Calgary for the Conservative Convention last week, and clearly the party's not changing policy right now in order to build upon the base. What they're now leaning in on is this change in tone that they hope will make Pierre Poilievre look more like a prime minister in waiting and the Conservative caucus a government in waiting. Is it possible to change public opinion on Pierre Poilievre, given how baked in opinions are about him already and the fact that Canadians have known him for decades?
Well, we won't know unless we see a different tone from him. And so far, I would say there are minor shifts in tone, and that takes a long time to embed itself in the consciousness of the electorate and the voting public. So that's a matter of time. And, right now, his negatives compared to Mr. Carney's positives are just miles apart. And even if at one point a few weeks ago the Conservatives and the Liberals were neck and neck, the Liberals have taken a noticeable, statistically significant bump up in the polls, not to be ignored. So he's
across
got a lot
all
of
polls too. It's
yes,
not just one; there are multiple polls.
Like, in fact, I was looking at 338.com, the sort of aggregator, and the whole column is all aligned. Every poll in Canada, every pollster in Canada says that and has marked it. So it's not to be ignored. And I think that it's interesting. Mr. Poilievre may be taking note of some of the advice he's gotten this week from Mr. Harper. Vis-a-vis the external threat to Canada, to our economy, to sovereignty, and cooperating with the government to a certain measure to make him look more statesmanlike and to make him look more prime ministerial and more appealing. So we'll see.
Can opinions change on him?
Well, I was talking to some Tory MPs at the weekend convention, and they were saying that Mr. Poilievre's tone was, pushing away voters. Now they are hoping that voters will start listening again. But for that to happen, the MPs, the local MPs, will have to go and tell the voters that Mr. Poilievre has a new tone. Please, would you listen to him? And that may sway some people, but it's going to, as Tonda mentioned, it's a big job. It takes months before you achieve something noticeable in the poll. And going back to the polls that Tonda was alluding to, the Liberals are ahead, but also they have an advantage. Their vote is so efficient. They're mostly in urban ridings. You need less support nationally to bring a lot of seats, contrary to the Conservative Party. So that, whether they're equal or ahead, even when they're equal, they could win a majority because their vote is so efficient.
Mia, can opinions change on the Conservative leader?
I think the bigger question is, can the Conservative leader actually change? Because we've seen this for, however long he's been in politics. This is the politician he is. It's his style. It's his personality. And he also has quite a foe in Mark Carney right now. That's what caused him all those problems during the election. And he has not shown a lot of change in tone. He's talking about cooperation a little bit, but there's still the same attacks and question period antics and things like that haven't changed. So I'm not sure how long he could be comfortable changing a tone, because this is who he is. This is the reason the Conservatives even put him where he is, because of who he is. So whether opinions can change maybe depends on how much he actually can change.
I also do wonder about the opinions Conservatives across the country have of Pierre Poilievre, because in Calgary he was able to get the support of more than 87% of the delegates there. But underlying that phrase, delegates there, Conservatives outside of Calgary weren't voting, and there were a couple of Conservatives expressing concern about how deep that support truly is. What do you say to that?
Yeah, no, and I heard the same, even going into the convention, that because there were going to be so many Ontario Conservatives not there, Quebec Conservatives not there, and Atlantic Canadian Conservatives as well. Look, he got a whopping big number. 87.4% was a number that surprised even the Conservative organizers who were organizing to get that number.
Well, the very fact that it wasn't a media event, it was a press release in the middle of the night.
In the middle of the night, right? So that no one would have to sort of display for eternity, you know, a horrible scene if he failed to achieve that threshold. So I think that they were surprised to themselves the extent to which he got the number there, but that was the very strongest base he could assemble for a convention like that. So I've heard the same. You know, I'm sure you guys have. You know that it has quelled a certain amount of willingness on anyone's part to speak out now, because he's got the number. More importantly, there's nobody who came forward leading up to the convention, at the convention, post the convention, to oppose him in any way. And that includes within caucus and outside caucus. There's no alternative leader. Yeah. So they're sticking with him, even if those Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canadians didn't show up in force at the convention floor. They've resigned themselves to stick with him through the next election and see where it takes them.
What did you hear?
Well, it was explained to me that prior to Mr. Poilievre's speech, there was some people who were allowed to vote. And at that time, they was keeping the score. It was about 81%. His speech swayed some people, pumped it up. So it was, you know, more than maybe 90% or a range, but it brought down to 87.4% because of the speech. It's true that there were more delegates from the West probably than from Quebec and Ontario, because there was also a convention for Doug Ford. But besides the change of tone, the Conservative Party's leadership under Mr. Poilievre is trying to reach out now to people like Doug Ford, trying to get closer to him. Same thing with Tim Hodgson, the Nova Scotia Premier. So it means that they understand the game, that if they don't change the way they have treated past allies or would-be allies, they're going to be doomed in the next election. So that's something that is changing. But again, that will take time before it gives dividends, politically speaking, to the Conservative Party.
One thing I think that was notable is that the tone shift that they say they're going to adopt is a work in progress for Mr. Poilievre, but they have made a significant change in the leader of their campaign. Their next campaign, Stephen Outhouse, is a very affable person and has already on all the networks sent all the signals to the rest of the party, and that the next campaign will not look like the last campaign. So that's already a big step.
Proof in point, if I may say, Steve Outhouse had a chat with him at the convention for half an hour. I never had that chance with Jenny Byrne, for example. As a francophone reporter from Quebec.
He was very accessible. What do you say about how deep Pierre Poilievre's support is?
I mean, I think to Tonda's point, I think that the number has quieted some of those critics and some of the chatter and the I don't want to call it whining, but from within the caucus. The Conservatives had a really rough fall. There's no denying that. They lost 2 MPs to the Liberals. There was a lot of chatter right before Christmas that there were more in the wings that were waiting to go. We haven't seen any more signs, and the Liberals aren't quite talking the same way they were about that, like, as they were before Christmas. So it could still happen, but we haven't seen it. It didn't happen before the House came back. Certainly hasn't happened after the convention. So that alone, if he sort of can get that, put that behind them and move forward, is sort of a good progress for him from this number. But the polls may not change for them, and people tend to get a little bit cranky as if the poll numbers start to do better for the Liberals. You're going to start to hear those voices and those complaints and whining come up again.
Something interesting that we've seen in the polls also is that about 24% of people say would vote Conservative are happy with the way Mark Carney is governing the country. That is a crowd that is usually, with Pierre Poilievre, but in an election campaign, they could flip on the other side. So that's another challenge that Mr. Poilievre is facing as well. You
might find 24% of the Conservative caucus are happy with the way Mark Carney is governing.
Which is what Mark Carney's government is hoping for. Right? They say it's so easy to cross this carpet. Listen, I also want to talk about the EV strategy that was unveiled, really the auto strategy, because when the EV mandates were killed by Prime Minister Carney over the summer, there was a lot of questions. Okay, where is your priorities for environmental policy? Now comes the EV strategy wrapped into a larger auto strategy for this country. What does that say about the priority that Mark Carney is giving to the environment, Tonda?
Well, look, he pushed back at questions that challenged him on his climate action commitment yesterday when he announced the strategy, saying that you have to look at the bigger picture and the bigger agenda. And that is true. He is trying to put together all the pieces of a much larger puzzle, build a values and supply chain from critical minerals right up through the battery, right up through the assembly, to being able to market electric vehicles made in Canada, potentially with Canadian software and technology to push back at the whole spy car problem and concerns around the Chinese EVs. And so I think that's a work in progress for people who are watching as well. The environmentalists are pretty concerned about it. They think that in moving to fuel efficiency standards, that basically he's given more flexibility and too much to the auto companies. But I think there's also a certain reality that Mr. Carney has exhibited in all his policies. He believes that pragmatism is the way to go, and that it is not pragmatic, it is not practical to expect that all new cars in Canada would have been EVs by 9 years from now. And to that extent, you know, he's got his eye on keeping the actual existing auto industry and jobs intact. So I don't know. I think we'll have to see. I'm interested to hear from the left flank within his caucus what they think about it all, because we haven't heard them. They're not very vocal right now. And I think I expected the reaction from the environmentalists. I expected the reaction we heard from the auto sector. What my unknown is how his own people are calculating. Has he persuaded them that the big picture strategy makes sense, is coherent?
Yeah, and the people who gave their vote to the Liberals in the last election.
Yeah.
Joël-Denis.
I have a phrase that comes back to my mind that Mr. Carney said in Davos. He said, we have to deal with the world in which we live and not the world we wish it would be. And that's kind of pragmatism, I would say. And I think what Mr. Carney announced this week is a policy that is in sync with the economic reality that we're facing. I've talked to some cabinet ministers, and they all agree that when you lose your job, your first thought is not to go and kiss a tree. And that's, you know, that's basically what the policy is. We need to deal with the economic environment. Maybe less the environment per se, but the economic environment commands that maybe we go slower at what we had thought was possible before under Justin Trudeau, for example.
He's putting in a lot of measures to support this transition to an EV industry. And that's impressive. And I think that he's got a pretty strong message to corporate Canada and car companies and car makers and manufacturers all across the board. Like, get with the transition. Don't think that we're going backwards. So that I took away as well.
Yeah.
I was struck, despite the fact that there were some environment groups who were quite unhappy with this policy, I was quite struck at how muted some of that criticism was. Yeah. There were some, I mean, I used to cover the environment full time, and my inbox is still infiltrated with that. And I was quite surprised. I was expecting an absolute flood of emails of, this is horrible, it's awful, I can't believe he's doing this. That was not, it didn't really happen. There was a few that they raised some concerns. They noted we're not going to get the same emissions cuts as we would have had from the old mandate. But they also pointed out that maybe this is the right policy for now. I would also point out that Europe, which is generally far more environmental than Canada has been and far more willing to go down that route, also scaled back in a similar way its mandate, for its goals for EVs, and they're much further ahead than we are getting to EV adoption as it is. So there was very little chance we were going to meet that mandate in the first place. So ultimately, then it just became a tax on car makers if they can't do it, if people aren't buying the cars. This policy to don't do tailpipes is the way we've done it for emissions from cars for years in Canada. The auto sector is very comfortable and knowledgeable about it. So I felt kind of like everyone was like, okay, is it perfect? No, but is it going to work? Maybe. That's kind of what struck me. And I did hear from a couple of Liberals who are more on the left. They're not super alarmed by it. They're not thrilled. They're not throwing rocks. Yeah, they're more alarmed by some of the other climate policies than this particular one.
Yeah, I think it's that support for the transition piece that's been persuasive of both. I saw the same thing, a more muted reaction than you might expect, and a willingness to sort of give it a try.
Yeah. But to your point, one of the questions that this Prime Minister hates the most is anybody questioning his credibility on climate.
Yeah.
Okay. We didn't do that. We just explored the issue. Anyways, listen, before we're done, I also want to note the fact that, you know, more somber tone here, in that there were tributes paid this week to Kirsty Duncan. She passed away, 59 years of age, after fighting cancer. Her death was announced last week. There were tributes paid to her in the Commons on Friday. Let's take a listen.
After my party lost government in 2015, Kirsty never once lorded her newfound status over me. Instead, she reached out with her characteristic quiet kindness, through texts, emails, or simply stopping by to say hello, always checking in to ensure I was coping with the loss and transition to opposition in a healthy way. She even went as far as to share meaningful tips with me on how to be a more effective opposition member. When I asked why she was investing time in helping me learn the ropes of opposition, she answered without hesitation. Our country is stronger when more women understand how to both govern and hold the government to account.
So today, Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Bloc Québécois and on my own personal behalf, I would like to say thank you. Thank you for your courage, your integrity, and your humanity, Kirsty. Your example will continue to remind us that politics, when guided by knowledge and empathy, can truly change lives.
I'll close with these words in Gaelic, Madam Speaker. I don't know how to speak Gaelic in the past tense, so I can only say in the present tense, Kirsty, hagul akam orsht. I love you, Kirsty.
Now, Kirsty Duncan's time in Ottawa, predates my return a few years ago. So you three will speak better to this than I. What will you remember her for? What will she be remembered for, do you think, Tonda?
I mean, all those tributes spoke to her kindness. There was no MP that was as kind or as smiling and open-hearted to reporters, to her colleagues, to her opponents. That stood out for me. She stayed in touch long after she left Parliament Hill with me and spoke frankly about her illness. And I remember, I think the most, she did a lot for women's safety in sport and athletic safety in sport, but what I remember her for is when the pandemic hit in March 2020, not long after that, I had read about her book. I hadn't read the book at the time, got the book out of the library, had it for most of the pandemic actually, read the book and phoned her about it and did a long interview with her about what prompted that and sort of digging into the roots of the Spanish flu and what lessons could we take about that and dealing with the pandemic that we were facing. She was so generous with her time and her observations, to Michelle Rempel-Garner's point. That's what I remember.
Yeah. Joël-Denis?
That kindness, also generosity, and also, ready to give a lot of time to us as reporters, but also facts matter. That because she was a scientist, and she brought back, that credibility after some time under the Conservative Party, where scientists were told not to speak to the media. So she brought back the scientist level, if I may say, to the media, and so that was a great contribution to the return of scientists and facts in government.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the one word that I would also use on top of the kindness and generosity that she gave was passion. She was very passionate about things, including science. She was super passionate about sports and safety in sports, and I think the legacy that she might leave is some of what we did to try and improve safety for athletes in this country. She wanted to do more. One of the final conversations I ever had with her is her regret that she hadn't been able to accomplish everything she'd wanted to do on that file, and that was not on her, that was on society and the government at the time. But she was very passionate about it, and she did not drop it, even despite how sick she got, how hard she had to battle. She continued to fight for that, and that's what I will remember her for.
59 years old, entirely too young, and when you hear the amount of outpouring of emotion and love and respect that she has to this day, it's a testament to her, and sadly I did not know her, but thank you for sharing your thoughts. Listen, we're now going to switch over to one of our second last segment. Be prepared, Tonda. Our yays and nays of the week. Mia, it's not Tonda's favorite part of the week. But anyways.
I mean, it's not going to be mine either. So.
But I love it. So, Tonda, your yays and nays of the week, please.
Okay, I actually have some. I thought about it an hour ago. I think my big yay this week goes out to the principle of cross-partisanship in support of national unity. At the beginning of the week, we saw Jean Chrétien and Stephen Harper, former political rivals, speak to the necessity of that and the necessity of opposite sides of the aisle working together to keep the country together and face the common threat of what's going on in the U.S. right now. And then we saw Mark Carney and Stephen Harper do the same thing. And then I think we got a sense, there was a flavor, I detected that in Mr. Poilievre's comments and the efforts that both Carney and Poilievre made to sit down. Now, are they ticking boxes? I don't know. But yay to that spirit, and let's see more of it. My nay, okay, this is so trivial, but it's, what is the public broadcaster, the CBC, breaking in to the Olympic coverage with ads? I thought that was cheap and cheesy and outrageous, and I cannot believe they did that. They wrecked the whole first hour of the Olympics for me.
Underline, this is the best nay from Tonda MacCharles ever. Okay.
Speaking of passion.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of passion. Joël-Denis.
My yay goes to former Prime Minister Stephen Harper for finally, I would say, reaching the status of an elder statesman by being available to Canadians, by making the panel, being part of a panel with Jean Chrétien, the unveiling of his portrait also, and he had comments. Also, the gala that underlined his 20th anniversary and, you know, the release of his documents at the archives. I think this week marked the beginning of the status of elder statesman of Monsieur Harper, because in the past he was absent from the limelight. He stayed away from the media. He stayed away from a national conversation. He's back in, and I think that's good because he brings bipartisan nature to the current situation, and we need that at the time when we're facing external threats, but also internal threats with the separatist movement in Alberta and Quebec. So that's a long yay, but it's well deserved from Mr. Harper.
He also let the media into all of those events.
Exactly.
That was great.
Yeah, more yay for him.
But then he said he was going back into the woodwork. his last big speech.
He also
said,
took no questions from us,
retiring.
which, you know.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
And my name goes to Tory MP Joël-Denis for going on a solo mission to Washington, trying to resolve the free trade agreement, free trade negotiation between Canada and the United States. You know, diplomacy does not work with megaphone, and that's, I think he's trying to turn it into a public stunt, and I don't think it's going to work, do anything good for Canada. It's going to be neutral, but also I would say that with no firm, clear mandate from the government, what's the point? Other than saying hello to his good friend Judy Vance.
Okay. Yeas and nays, Mia?
So I also made notes because I was stressed about this. But my initial yay was sort of along the lines of what Tonda said with the sort of the bipartisanship, but just for something a little different, I'm going to say the Premier of New Brunswick leaving X. It was a move that she made, I think it was yesterday. She's making it sort of on the principle that it is a platform that has developed some significant problems, some questions about AI, some questions about how they're using AI for sexually explicit images. And she said, on principle, I can't support this anymore. I think we should see more of this from our leaders. I know that it is a platform that has become quite prevalent and useful for governments to get their message across, but there are many other ways to do that. And if we don't take a stand against certain things like this, then we can't really criticize it or call it out. So I think that was a big yay. Sort of, I think, went a little under the radar, but for me it was a big yay.
That was good.
And my nay was also Jamil Jivani going to Washington, not just for the fact that I think it undermines what Canada's trying to do. It wasn't clear to me if he was trying to make a bigger point against Mark Carney or his own leader, because you didn't hear a lot of the Conservatives talking about this trip this week either. But specifically, he went down there and suggested that he was telling them that no, Canada wasn't going to make a bigger deal with China, and that we were losing auto jobs because we were now bringing in cars from China, which we haven't yet. No. The jobs that are being lost in Canada in the auto sector are because of where he was. It is because of Washington. And so I don't think that was a good message, and I do think it will undermine sort of the role that the whole government is trying to play in these negotiations, which are quite critical for Canada and for the auto sector.
Yeah. Okay, listen, quickly running out of time, but one more segment before we are done, and that is the look ahead to see what you are looking ahead to in the days forward, Tonda?
Next week, we're expecting the defense industrial strategy from the government, and I'm very interested interested to see if we get signals on the F-35 purchase, where that's headed, and to what extent, Carney's Buy Canadian push actually sort of bleeds through their whole strategy at a time when the U.S. is arguing that, look, Canada and America have a very integrated defense industry, and you get to bid on, Canadian companies get to bid on American contracts like they're American companies. And so if we start reversing that up here, there's going to be a fallout. I'm interested to see that whole strategy, where it goes, what it says in terms of our role in NATO.
Okay, Same thing as Tonda. This is a major announcement coming on the heels of the one on the auto sector. And it is supposed to be transformative for our national economy. Less reliant on the United States, more jobs for us. We'll see how big it is. But they've been working on this policy for a very, very long time. So finally, we'll see the fruit of it.
Okay. Not shocking. That is also my look at the defense industrial strategy. I'm also curious to see how much it shows us whether we're going to meet that NATO target that Mark Carney said last year, that 2% initially and 5% over the longer term. Are they going to lay out a path that's actually going to show us how to get there? The parliamentary budget officer suggested this week it'll be $33 billion a year more to meet that 5% target, and that's a lot of money and a lot of money to get out the door.
Yeah, a lot of money, a lot of choices to be made. Listen, thank you for that. A really great discussion. Mia, Tonda, Joël-Denis,
Thanks.
Thank you.
Michael.
Have a good weekend.
You too. And that is our episode this week. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for joining us. And yes, we will be back next week. You have been listening to The Bureau Chiefs with Michael Serapio, a primetime politics podcast from CPAC.